Sheena, you were talking about your relationship to your founding institution, and Lucille, do you want to jump in?
Okay, well, I started working with HCCI while I was director of the Harlem office of HPD. So I had a long-standing relationship with many of the ministers. My grandfather having actually been a minister of a Harlem church. I had known many of them. And I had worked with them in that role as director of the Harlem office because I was director of that office at about the time their plan was being put together and formed. I continued to work with them through a number of other jobs. I became assistant commissioner eventually at HPD, and then I was general counsel at the Empowerment Zone. And in each instance, through a different relationship, I continued to work with the organization. Because it is an organization of many ministers, and I should stop and say one is here today, Reverend Walter Barton, who is the senior pastor at Newman Memorial Methodist Church here in Bed-Stuy. He was the pastor of St. Mark's Methodist in Harlem. And so that consortium, whose interest was rebuilding Harlem, was my connection as a government representative, as an economic development counsel and chief of staff, and then I got involved with the organization directly when the founding pastor became ill. And so they considered me and did a worldwide search and then hired me about a year later.
They knew a good thing when they saw it.
And I think it was not only that I wasn't a minister, but also I was a woman, and that's pretty amazing when a group of senior pastors get together and decide to hire a woman to lead their organization.
So I guess as you start to grow organizationally and bring in other funding sources, it's important to maintain those relationships, but it's also important to sort of think about the bigger picture.
I think it was critical, the relationships that I had built over time in government and in other areas that I was able to bring to the organization.
Now, when you advance from a volunteer-driven organization or visionary-driven organization to a more professional organization, do you find that there are conflicts with sort of the original vision and the growth strategies as you go forward?
I think there are always challenges for nonprofits in general, and certainly for faith-based institutions that are in this type of business, between mission and sustainability for the organization. We have 100 apartment buildings and low-income families that live in them, and if people don't pay their rent, you can't pay the fuel bill. But can Abyssinian throw people on the street, as a faith-based institution? That's always a challenge, and that kind of has been a struggle conflict. How do you maintain and sustain the organization as an institution so you can continue to do the work, but you have to have some business principles in place for that sustainability? And sometimes, and the other thing I think, when you are a faith-based institution, everyone knows you as that. So they're expecting and anticipating that you behave in a certain way as well. So that can definitely lead to a challenge.
Yeah, I think sometimes our tenants tend to take advantage of us, figuring, they'll understand, they have more compassion, they're going to let me work this out over time. And we certainly have more in the private sector, but at some point we have to say, as she said, so we got to pay fuel bills this winter.
Right.
And too many people tip the scale to a dysfunctional building, and that's not what we want.
Yeah.
I would say and I'm sure Sheena and Lucille would agree, we're accountable to our community, and that's a big, broad accountability. So we face these issues with people that were residents that were living in rehab buildings that might only be paying $200 a month in rent. That was what they should be paying, but they weren't paying that. And I think it's not hard to understand that can carry the fuel cost, not to mention other overhead costs for the building. And so we've had to take that on in a number of our properties, these are co-ops, so we don't own the property. We're the management agent. We're also responsible for the regulatory agreement. We have this informal responsibility. Government finds the properties too small for them to deal with, but we're concerned that if we don't correct some of these issues, these properties are not going to survive. And then people are starting to see that they can sell these units at a very high price outside of the regulatory agreement or under the table. And so we have to play this dual role of being the support and the help, but also the accountability. And many people, they know that they go to HPD, they go to the community board, we've been down to the community board after we go to court for years and years and years to explain to the community board why Ms. Jones has not been able to pay her $200 a month in rent. So there are these conflicts, but I think we have to have transparency in what we do, and as a part of this accountability to our mission, be able to state to everyone, exactly why we're doing things and how they're being done. And I think that has worked for us over time.
I just want to add to that. There also is the part of these issues we're discussing now is the reasons why our services expanded. We recognize that just putting a roof over someone's head really doesn't solve all of the problems to create a good quality of life. And so we went into workforce development. We began to offer, social services and programs for children. We formed what we call the Community Improvement Group, where we meet with the police and fire and other local officials to make sure that the community needs overall are being addressed. So, yes, housing was a first step, and certainly a critical first step, the basics, food, clothing, and shelter. But beyond that, how do you create quality of life and a community where people have access to the economic opportunities that are going on in connection with the rebuilding of the community?